Today we're going to be learning Chagigah Daf Yomi, continuing with our Tuma and Tahara. Today will be a little bit simpler than yesterday, although we will get more into as time goes on all the Tuma and Tahara. I have a good chart planned for tomorrow with all the Rishon and Sheni and all that. So stay tuned for that for tomorrow. Also, a few announcements before we start. The Siyum is next Tuesday. The registration will start within the next few days and the program will be publicized. So we hope to see you all there on Zoom. It's the usual 8:30 p.m. Israel time, even though it's on a Tuesday, right? We chose to, even though Sunday is usually a better day for some people, we didn't want to push off the Siyum 5 days. We wanted to finish together on time. There's something to that. So we'll be doing that. And if you're in Israel, there will be Siyums around the country on Monday night. They'll be in Hebrew, but please come join. There'll be a lot of different Siyums going on. And the main one, or one of them, the one that I'll be doing will be also on Zoom. So anyone who wants to watch it can watch it. That'll be the night before at around 8 or 8:15. Okay, that's Monday night. The other thing is our tapestry. Okay, we're going to do the raffle today. So anyone who got in your tapestry before, you'll be part of the raffle to win a set of Yevamot Schottenstein Gemaras, Schottenstein, and anyone who hasn't yet gotten it in, it's definitely not too late. Please send in. Okay, we have a lot, but we want to show the thousands of women that are learning. So please get your videos, pictures, your little story about yourself into our tapestry to be part of our learners tapestry, which is really an amazing historical moment to just say, wow, these are women finishing Seder Moed, whether you finished or whether you didn't finish, but women who are part of the learning. And it's a really great opportunity to be able to showcase all different women that are learning the daf now. Okay, today's daf is sponsored by Deborah Hoffman Wade in honor of Carol Robinson and Rabbi Art Gould. Thank you for encouraging my path to Talmud and Hadran. As an elder and beginner, I am radiant with joy at the beginning of a new and ongoing path of learning, never too old to start. And today's daf is sponsored by Miriam Almog in honor of the Hadran team and their wonderful learning programs. Beautiful dedications. Okay, we are now going to get started with our daf. We ended yesterday with a braita about, we had two contradictory braitot. I'll just go back and I put it on the sheet for today just to kind of remember where we're up to. We had a contradiction between two braitot. One said, Hanotel yadav nitkaven yadav torot, lo nitkaven yadav tmeot. When you do netilat yadayim, you wash your hands to get off the impurity. So we ended with yesterday why we wash our hands before we eat bread. If you have intent, you're doing it for netilat yadayim to clean your hands, then it works. If not, not. And same thing with matbil yadav. If you put them into a mikveh, right? We talked about there's different types of ways you clean your hands for different situations. So you need intent. But another braita said, bein nitkaven, bein lo nitkaven yadav toro. Whether you had intent or you didn't have intent, either which way it works. To which the Gemara Rav Nachman had said, lo kashya, kan lechulin, kan lemaaser. There's a difference. We already saw in the Mishna there were different levels. There's people who treat their chulin, their non-sacred items, and yet want to be pure while doing it, even though they don't really need to, but they treat it with an extra stringency. That's the most lenient. Above that, we have Maaser Sheni, which is the produce that you bring to Jerusalem and eat there. That has sanctity to it. Remember, normally it has sanctity. You move the sanctity onto coins. If you're not going to schlep your fruits, your coins get the sanctity. The fruits no longer have it. When you go to Jerusalem and you buy something with it, the sanctity moves from the money to whatever you buy, which we learned already could be meat for sacrifices, could be fruits, produce, anything like that. That then becomes sanctified, and that's what we're discussing. Whichever part of it that's sanctified, your hands have to be clean when touching it. Then, so we said here, if you're washing your hands for chulin, which is just astringency, you don't need intent. If you're washing it for Maaser Sheni or anything above that, which actually has real sanctity to it, then you need intent. So that sounds very nice. But now the Gemara wants to know, how do we know that you don't need intent for your chulin if you're going to eat chulin, okay? And you want to be pure for eating your chulin. How do we know that? So what they're going to do, the structure is they're going to bring a Mishna from mikvaot, toveling things in the mikvah makes sense. They're going to try to bring that as our proof. The chulin doesn't need intent. They're then going to say in the end, you can't really prove it from there because that Mishnah could be understood as a case of intent, in which case they're going to bring a different Mishnah from Masechet Machshirin, which is about susceptibility to impurity. And it's a case that talks both about susceptibility to impurity and about mikvah and purifying your hands. And we're going to actually prove it from there. So the Mishnah says so again, we're going to have 2 attempts. The first attempt is going to be unsuccessful. The second attempt will be successful. Ditnan, as it says in the Mishnah, in mikvaot. Okay, you can look, by the way, there's a little aleph. If you're using a regular Gemara, that aleph sends you to Masoret Hashas. I'm coming off the skills class yesterday, so I have all this in my head that there's all these things to teach people, which is, right, the Masoret Hashas tells you where else you can find this. So if it's a Mishnah, it'll tell you where it appears in the Mishnah. So it tells you there, it's mikvaot, Parakeh, Mishnah Vav, okay, chapter 5, Mishnah 6. Gal shenitlash, you have a wave, and the wave detaches. I guess it just means the wave is coming, right? And it kind of falls on you, okay? And it's got 40 se'ah. It's a big wave. It has 40 se'ah. What's unique about 40 se'ah? It's the measurement required for a mikvah. So it has enough water that it in itself could be a mikvah. And nafal al ha'adam va'ala kelim. So this wave comes and falls all at once right on top of you, or falls on utensils that need to be toveled. Okay, they need to be purified. Tehorim, it actually works. So what do you see here? Now, we don't really know, did you have intent for it to fall on you or not? Okay, now, on the one hand, you can't exactly control the wave. On the other hand, maybe there is a way to have kavanah. Right now, we're going to assume you had no intent. You were sitting there on the beach, and a wave comes over you and falls on top of you. So that works to purify you. So now the Gemara says we're going to prove that this must be without intent, in which case we see that there is a case where you could tovel without intent, must be for chulin. And here you have it. That's what we were looking for. That for chulin, for non-sacred items, you don't need intent to wash your hands, or in this case, it's your body. So katane adam dumia de kelim. Notice there's 2 cases here. There's a person and there's utensils. Now, if 2 things appear next to each other, often we say we're going to learn from one from the other. So now what are we going to learn? Well, ma kelim de lo machavni. Now, could the utensils have had intention for the water to get on them? Of course not. Utensils don't have intellect, right? They don't have intellect. They can't think. They don't have a brain, right? They don't have intent at all. But since the kelim are lo machavne, af adam lo machaven. So it must be that the person in this case is just like the utensils. The utensils didn't have intent to become purified because there is no such thing. Therefore, the person must not have had intent. But now the Gemara says, no, I don't buy that. Mimai? Why do you say that? Dilma biyoshevu mitzapeh imatai yitale shagalaskina. Maybe you're sitting there waiting for the wave to come splash on top of you. Okay, you're waiting and saying, when is the wave going to come? And what do you do about this comparison, kelim and adam? Well, let's do the comparison the other way. Kelim dumiyada adam. Ma adam debar kavana, af kelim demachaven lehu. What do you mean kelim can't have intent? It's true, and I see you're writing it, Debbie, in the chat. It's true that utensils themselves can't, but the owner of the utensils can. So therefore, why don't we just say the kelim in this case is like an adam, just like a person could be sitting there waiting, when is the wave going to come? Likewise, the utensils could be a case where the owner of the utensils, right? The utensils are just an extension of the owner. The owner of the utensils has intent that they want the kelim to get purified, the utensils. So therefore, in the end, it's not clear that this Mishnah is a case where there's no intent, in which case we can't use it as proof. But now the Gemara wants to try one last time before they get to the next source. V'chi tema, why don't you say, if I'm waiting for this wave to come, and this wave has 40 se'ah, and it falls on top of me, right? Now, you normally think of mikveh, you dunk in a mikveh, but you could actually have a mikveh poured on top of you. So there's no unique halacha in this case. The Mishnah doesn't need to tell us this. If I'm sitting there waiting, and I have intent for the wave to come on me, and the wave has the minimum amount of a mikveh, which should totally work. So I don't need a Mishnah to tell me something that's totally obvious, in which case maybe that's not the interpretation. And then we go back to interpretation number 1, and it serves as our proof. But whenever you see the words v'chi tema, that means the Gemara is going to say, and what the literal translation in Hebrew is v'ka'ashel tomar, and when you would say the following, we're going to have an argument against that, okay? And as if you're going to say, there's nothing new and unique about saying Yoshevu mitzapeh, you're waiting for the wave to come. There was intent. It's obvious that this would work, in which case it can't be that the Mishnah is talking about that. Well, we're going to reject that. Because if you want to say Yoshevu mitzapeh ma'ala me'emra, what's the chiddush? There's nothing unique about it. We didn't need to say this. Well, I'll tell you what's unique. Sal kadat chamina, you might have thought, if you didn't have this Mishnah, what might you have thought, right? It's Gemara's favorite word, sal kadatach, right? You might have thought this, because we're always thinking endless possibilities. You might have thought, ligzor, this would be forbidden, not because it's forbidden, but maybe they wouldn't allow this because if we allowed this, you might come to think, and we're now going to have two other things that you might have mistakenly thought would work. If this works, that would work, and those for sure don't work. And that's why you need the Mishnah to tell you that this works, because it's telling you, don't think that it's forbidden. You might have, if we didn't have the Mishnah, you would have thought, maybe it doesn't work because if we allow this, you might come to think something else is going to work. And therefore, they had to tell you the case, in which case we still hold it could be. Again, this is all could be. It could be that you were waiting and there was intent, in which case this doesn't prove what we're looking for. So now what would you have thought? Ligzor dilma ate lemitva b'chardalit shel gshamim. The first option is you might have thought that if we allow this wave that falls on top of you, maybe you can also become pure if you're on this angled street, let's say, or road. The road is going down and there's rain dripping, and the rain, you've ever been in one of these things? I actually lost a set of car keys once in one of these streams of water. I was outside my kid's school. So my husband was out of town. It was a Friday. It was crazy. There were tons of people and it was pouring rain. And right outside school, there's this huge, there's an incline or a decline. And when it rains, it's like a stream. So now there's 40 se'ah for sure in all that water that was going down. Okay, that hill where it swept away my keys and never to be found. But that water is not viewed as one continuum because it's not viewed as if, it's not like a wave that all comes at once. It's the water's in all different places. And therefore we don't view it as one big thing. So actually my keys did not become tahor because it's not viewed as a mikvah. Okay, so now if you allow the wave to basically, and you say the wave can come and purify you, people might think that this stream of water that's coming from the rain would also purify you. But in fact, it doesn't. So therefore, you might have thought if we didn't have the Mishnah, maybe they forbade the wave, because if we allowed the wave, you would think that this chardalit shel shamim would work. Inami always means, or second option, nigzor rashin atu kipin. Okay, this is a bit weirder. The wave, when a wave comes, it goes around, right? It makes a big, explodes, but in the middle of it, there's empty airspace. So now we're going to learn Rashim is the head of the wave, okay, the first part that comes down. Keeping is the middle of the airspace, in the middle of the wave. So now they say, you might have thought that Nigzor Rashin Atu Kipin, we might have forbidden a wave that falls on top of me, because it's not like a bucket of water that's poured on top of me where there's no airspace in the middle. It comes in a circle in a wave with a big space in the middle. You might have thought if we allow a wave, yes, it is like a kippah. It is, right? A kippah is an overturned, right? Like a bowl. So it's exactly the shape there. So you might have thought that if I allow the head of the wave, people might think that if I stuck my hand inside with a utensil in my hand and I put it in the airspace of the wave, it seems a little weird that I would think that we could do this, but maybe it would work, and it really doesn't. Okay, we're going to see in a minute that it doesn't. So maybe nigzor rashin atu kipin kamash malan delo gazminan. That's why the Mishnah came. So again, this was all to prove the Mishnah could be in a case where there was intent. You'll say, right, if there wasn't intent, then the Mishnah has a big chidush, which is you don't need intent, and that's great. And that would be our proof that we're looking for. You don't need intent when you go, right, when you tovel in a mikvah or wash your hands for the purposes of eating chulin, and that you can prove from our Mishnah. But if the Mishnah is referring to a case where you're waiting for the wave and you had intent, then why do we even need the Mishnah? Well, we need it because if you didn't have the Mishnah, you might have thought that we would forbid this case from working so that people don't come to think that the stream of water going down the hill or the hole in the middle of the wave could work, and therefore they needed the Mishnah, and therefore, again, the Mishnah could be explained in both ways. So just to finish this off, they want you to know, Minatim or Delo matbilin b'kipin. How do we know that you can't tovel from the middle of the center of the wave? Ditanya, as it says in a Braita, matbilin b'rashim ve'ein matbilin b'kipin, lefi she'ein matbilin ba'avil. Okay, it says it explicitly. You can use the head of a wave, but you can't use the middle of the wave. because it's just air, and you can't use air, right? Even though it's surrounded by water, you can't use air to tovel your utensils. Okay, now that was our first attempt. Now we're going to go to attempt number 2. Again, remember our question. How do we know the chulin doesn't need intent when you're going to the mikveh? So now, ditznan. But we can learn it from this Mishna in Machshirin. So again, let's go over the background of what does it mean, susceptible to impurity. If you have crops that grow in the ground, okay, they get wet all the time, right? Rainwater, everything else, that's not considered that water came upon them, because the way it works is, in order for something to become impure, it has to first be susceptible to impurity, which basically means that we need to give it significance. It has to be useful for something. So first, it has to be that you put water on it. From what stage? Once it was cut from the ground. When it's attached to the ground, any water that gets on it is not considered, that created susceptibility and impurity. So from the moment I cut my carrots, let's say, these carrots are not going to be susceptible to impurity until what time? Until I put water on them. And it's very important the way I said it, not water gets on them, but I put water, okay? Or water gets on them in a way that I wanted them to get wet. Let's say they were filthy and the rain came, they were in a bass, what do you call it? One of those, losing my words, but you have a basket, let's say, just full of carrots, a crate, that's what I was thinking of. You have a crate of carrots, and it starts to pour, and you're thrilled because you wanted to wash off those carrots. And now, back to the teeming rain, this teeming rain is going to clean your carrots. So that's great. That would be a case where they became susceptible to impurity. If you didn't want them to get wet, or you didn't have any intent for them to get wet, you didn't care if they got wet, then the water wouldn't create susceptibility and impurity. So what does it mean, susceptibility and impurity? It means now, if my hands are impure and I touch those carrots or something else of impurity gets on them, they will be impure. But if the water hadn't gotten on without any kind of intent in any way, then it's not susceptible to impurity. And if I touch them I could have the most impure hands, it doesn't do anything. So this is the Masechet which talks about this halacha. It's called Machshirin. And it says here in the Mishnah, Perot shenaflu litoch hamat hamayim. You have a channel of water, and fruits fall into that channel of water by accident. So now you know it's not going to be susceptible to impurity because they fell in there by accident. Upashat mishi adav tmeo. Now I happen to have impure hands. I stick my hands in this water channel to take out the fruits. So now we have 2 halachot that we're addressing. Number 1, are the fruits susceptible to impurity? Number 2, do my hands become pure when I put them in the water? So according to this, it says, so I put my hands that were tmeim into the water, and theoretically this should work for matbilin. I put them in water and to purify them. Yadav tehorot, this actually works. What do you see here? For chulin purposes, it must be only for chulin. For chulin purposes, if I put my hands in water, even without intent to purify them, they're pure. We could stop here, okay? But since we're learning the Mishnah, they bring the whole Mishnah. And let's learn a little bit about things that aren't related to what we're doing, which is perot enam b'chiyutan. Chiyutan is the pasuk that talks about chiyutan mayim al zera, when water gets on a seed. And that's when we talk about susceptibility and purity. Anyway, we'll learn that more in depth in other places, but the fruits do not become susceptible to impurity because you didn't want, they fell in by accident. You had no intent in them going in the water. If you wanted to wash your hands, you wanted to purify your hands, so you put your hands in to pick up the fruits in order to purify them, then not only are yadav tohot, which obviously works because it even worked in the first case, but haperot hareim b'chiyutan. This is a bit of a weird halacha. Some people question it because it seems a little strange, but I'll explain the simple reading, which is, since I wanted to clean my hands, and how did I do it? By picking up the fruits and bringing them out of the water. In the end, it shows that I really wanted the water to fall in the fruits, because the fruits to fall in the water, because otherwise I wouldn't have. Now, this is the tricky part. What if I really want to just put my hands in? I could have put my hands in even without the fruits falling. So that's the weakness of this argument. But the idea is basically that since I now put my hands in to take the fruits out, and with that, I also got my hands purified, that shows that I was happy that the fruits went in the water, which means that actually creates susceptibility and impurity. Again, there is a question that some ask, which is, if I really just wanted to put my hands in, I could have put them in even without the fruits, right? One answer I thought about was maybe I didn't even notice that the channel was there until my fruits fell in. And then I realized, oh, here's some water. I could take it out. And then I was happy that my fruits fell in. Maybe that's a possibility. But let's put that aside because it's not really our topic. In any case, we've now found our proof that chulin doesn't need intent, because here I put my hands in without any intent to purify them, really just to take out the fruits, and it would work. Okay, and it obviously works if I had intent. That was case number 2. Eitive Rabba le Rav Nachman. Now we're going to have a question on this halacha. Rabba says to Rav Nachman, wait a minute, our Mishnah goes directly against this halacha. Remember our Mishnah? Let's go back. Hatovel lechulin. Remember it said if you intended to go to the mikveh for this purpose or to wash your hands for this purpose, it doesn't work for the higher purpose. And if you intended for this purpose, it doesn't work for the higher. It said if you intended for chulin, it doesn't work for maser sheni. So that seems to imply you need intent for chulin. So huchzak in lo huchzak lo. It sounds like it only works, right? It says hatovel lechulin v'huchzak lechulin. Right? If you toveled for chulin and you intended for chulin, you can eat chulin, but you can't eat maser. So it sounds like you need intent. So they say, no. Hachi kamra. This is what it really means. Really, you didn't intend at all. What it's saying is if you toveled without any intent or you washed your hands without any intent, then it works for chulin, but it doesn't work for the next level up. So it doesn't have to read exactly as we thought it read. Okay, so again, the Mishnah doesn't contradict. Second question from our Mishnah, Eitive, Taval v'lo huchzak. Said in the Mishnah, if you go in the mikveh without intention for anything, right, you have to intend when you go in the mikveh what it's for. So taval v'lo huchzak ki'ilu lo taval. It's as if you didn't go in the mikveh. There's no such thing as mikveh without intent. That seems pretty clear. You need intent even for chulin. So my lav ki'ilu lo taval klal, right? Well, how do we understand that? Is it not? It's as if you didn't go to the mikveh at all. Lo ki'ilu lo taval l'maser aval taval l'chulin. No, take that sentence and let's just limit it. When it said if you go in the mikveh without intent, it's as if you didn't go in the mikveh at all. And that meant if you want to eat maser sheni, if you want to eat all the levels above it, truma, kodesh, you want to deal with mechatat, for that you need intent, but not for chulin. Okay, now this is a bit of a weak answer because that's definitely not the simple reading of the Mishnah. And in fact, when Rav Nachman answers this question to Rabbah, when he answers it in this way, it says here that Rabbah, hu savar, he thought, dache kamad chele. The Rav Nachman is just making up an answer, right? Sometimes you feel that way in the Gemara, that they're just making up an answer out of the blue just to kind of work it in with what they think. So we kind of thought this is not really a great answer, and he's just kind of making this up. Now, Rabbi had 2 options at that point where what he could do. Either he could go back to Rav Nachman and say, what are you talking about? Or alternatively, he could say, let me go look this up and let me see if there's really some legitimacy to what he says. So in fact, Rabbah took option number 2, the more respectful option, and nafik dak ve'eshkach. This is a good lesson, I think, for everybody, right? Sometimes you hear something that sounds so preposterous and you start screaming, what are you talking about? What do you mean? What's this? Rabbah says, wait a minute, let me go look this up. He goes out, he goes dak, he was midayek, right? He goes and tries to learn. Maybe he talks to other people. He tries to figure out the eshkach. In his studies, he finds a braita that says exactly what Rav Nachman said, which basically means that Rav Nachman was clearly right, and he wasn't just making this up. So what did he find? Tanya, he heard that this braita says, Taval v'lo huchzak, asur l'ma'aser mutar l'chulin. If you go to the mikveh without any intent, you can eat chulin, but you can't have maser sheni and obviously anything above that. So here you have it, an explicit braita that said exactly the way Rav Nachman understood our Mishnah and supports everything we've been saying until now, in today's daf anyway. Okay, Amar Rabbi Elazar. Now we're going to have another case. Until now we were talking about, number 1, you didn't have intent for chulin, right? And it works for chulin. If you didn't have intent for maser sheni and above, right, you have to have intent, and you have to have intent that I plan to eat maser sheni, or I plan to eat, right? And if you did maser sheni, you can't eat the level above. And if you, right, you can't eat truma. And if you did for truma, you can't eat kachim. Kachim, you can't touch mechatat. If you had intent for mechatat, then, right, for the paraduma stuff, then you can do anything. Okay, but now we're going to have a case. Taval va'ala, you went in the mikveh and you got up. Now you had intent to purify yourself, but you didn't. Now the way I would have assumed most people go to the mikveh is not for a particular thing, but just in general. So I went in the mikveh with no particular intent, but yes, intent to tovel, to purify myself, but not for something specific. Allah, I got out of the mikveh and I'm standing outside the mikveh. Tosfot says I'm still wet. Okay, I have to still be wet according to Tosfot. Not everybody says that, but Tosfot thinks you have to still be wet. It has to still be somewhat connected. It can't be 5 hours later, right? And no connection at all. I can now think to myself, oh, you know what? I wanted that to be for mechatat, or I wanted it to be for kodesh, or whatever it might be that you have intent for. So the Gemara says, wait, we have a contradiction to this. It says in a different source, a different braita, Odehu raglo achat b'mayim. If you still have 1 foot in the mikvah, okay, I'm almost out of the mikvah, but my left foot is still in the mikvah. Right? Doesn't matter what foot. I was just giving an example. Hu chazak l'davar kal. If I went in that mikvah for, let's say, Maser Sheni, okay, but my leg is still in the mikvah, 1 leg is still there. Machzik atzmo l'davar chamur. Okay, I can now change my mind while my leg is still in the mikvah, and I can say, you know what? I really want to eat sacrificial meat. I remember that I have some still in my house, or my neighbor's going to the temple and they're sacrificing an animal, and I want to do this. So while your leg is still in the mikvah, you can change your intent. Now, then it says, Allah, but once I leave that mikvah, shuvei no machzik. I can't change my mind anymore. So now, my lavei no machzik klal, it sounds like once I leave the mikvah, I can't change my mind about anything. So how did Rabbi Elazar say that when I get out of the mikvah, I can say retroactively what I was intending when I was in the mikvah? So the Gemara says, lo, odeyu afa pishuch zach muchzak. These are 2 different cases. If I'm still in the mikvah, even though I intended, let's say for Maser Sheni, I can change my mind and decide I want to eat kodshim. But Allah, once I get out, there's 2 tracks. One is im lohu chazak machzik. Our case is not the same as the case we just described. The case when the 1 leg is coming out, is still in the mikvah. I had a particular intent and I want to change it. That can only work if my leg is still in the mikvah. But if I had intent just generally to purify and I didn't specify for what purpose, that I could do even once I left the mikvah. So that's what it says right here, which is once I get out, Allah, im lo huchzak machzik. If it wasn't intentional, right? I didn't intend anything in particular, then I can say what intent I had. Right? This does work. I saw someone was saying about retroactive. It works like breira, basically. What I'm basically saying is breira, if you remember, is retroactive designation. Since I was general about it, and I didn't say specifically what, even once I'm out, I could say that what I really intended when I was inside was to eat sacrificial meat, for example. But if I already had intent and I said, I'm doing this for Maser Sheni, I can't change my mind once I got out of the mikvah because I was very clear. You can't say, oh, retroactively, that's really what I meant. That's not what you meant. You intended Maser Sheni. You can't just change your mind. So, right there, it says here, Ve'im huchzak eino machzik. But if you intended something in particular, you can't change it once you got out of the mikvah. But if your leg is still in the mikvah, then you actually could change. So now the Gemara asks, Man tana odei raglo chat b'mayim. Who's the Tana who holds that having 1 leg in the water is effective? Okay, we're now going to see that there's a machloket about this. Not exactly this case, but a case where someone has a leg in the mikvah for a different halacha. So Amar Rabbi Pidat, Rabbi Yehuda. I want you to remember that Rabbi Pidat's the one who says this is Rabbi Yehuda, because it could be other people will say everybody agrees to this halacha. But Rabbi Pidat thinks it's only Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Okay, this is going to be important for later. Titnan. So it says in the following Mishna, Mikvah shenimdad, v'yeshbo, we're now in a totally different case. We measure the mikvah, v'yeshbo arba'im se'ah mechuvanot. The mikvah has exactly 40 se'ah. Now, what happens when you go in a bathtub, right? Bathtub has a certain amount of water. As soon as you get out, you take water out with you, right? Or a swimming pool or whatever it is. So there's water on your body that leaves. So if this mikvah had exactly the amount for kosher mikvah, right? Really precisely. And one person went in the mikvah after the other. So you can see where this is going. If I went in first, I take some water out with me. When you go in, there's no longer 40 se'ah. It's not a kosher mikvah. So therefore, harishon tahor, hasheni tameh. The first one, it worked for me. It didn't work for you. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees a little bit and says, well, it depends. If my foot was still in the water, I hadn't fully gotten it. Now, what happens? The mikvah still doesn't have 40 se'ah. Where's the rest of the 40 se'ah? On my body. And my body has my foot in the water. So now he says, Afa sheni tahor. Why? This works like, okay, we're going to go back to laws of sukkah and laws of eruv, where we learned about good achit. Do you remember good achit, where we say good achit mechitzti? You can see an imaginary wall come down, right? You have a wall that's high up, but we view it as if it goes all the way down. Okay, so now what do we say? Good. Now here it's not a mechitza, it's the water. We view the water that's on me, since my leg is still in the mikveh, as if the water is dripping down into the mikveh, even though, right, now water does drip down, but that's not because it's going to drip down. We know the water isn't going to stay on my body, some of it, and the mikveh is not going to have 40 sa'ah, but we view me as if I'm still connected, and the water it's as if the water's in the mikveh. It's as if the mikveh has 40 sa'ah, and that person can go in the mikveh and is totally pure. So that's Rabbi Yehuda. So comes Rabbi Pidat, and he says, when we talked before about Raglocha b'mikvah, in terms of kavana in mikvah, okay, right, what your intent was, that you could change your intent, that matches only Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, that 1 foot in the water is significant because the rabbis didn't think 1 foot in the water does anything. Okay, the Tanakama there. So Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabbi Baravua, Rav Nachman now says, and they are Rabbi Baravua, in what case are they arguing? There's 2 different cases. There's Tuma de'oraita, right, where you're impure on a de'oraita level, on a Torah level. Remember, we started our Mishna by saying, we're talking here about all sorts of rabbinic ordinances that made you impure when really by Torah law, you're not impure. So there's 2 levels. There's ma'alot Rabbanan, we're going to say, which are all these extra Rabbanan, or the rabbinic ordinances that you're going to be impure for this or that. And then there's regular Tumantara, which is Torah. So comes Rav Nachman and he said this machloket here about whether it works or not when you have 1 foot in the water is b'ma'alot Rabbanan. It's only in rabbinic law. But mituma l'tara divrei hakol sheni tamei. But when it comes to laws of Torah, you're impure by Torah law. This foot thing in the water, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, is not going to work. Because in the end, you're not in a mikveh with 40 sa'ah. It's very nice. We can view the water is going down, but that's not going to work for Torah law. And then when Rabbi Pidat said, now this is why I said, remember Rabbi Pidat, according to this, Hainu to Rabbi Pidat, that matches Rabbi Pidat. Why? Because according to this, in what case do they have a debate? They have a debate only in rabbinic law. Now, what's the issue of intent? Intent is all a rabbinic law. By Torah law, if you went in the mikveh, you went in the mikveh. It doesn't make a difference, intent, not intent. That's a rabbinic thing that they instituted. So there, Rabbi Pidat said, it's a machloket. And when the Mishna said 1 foot in the water works for intent about changing your mind, that's in a rabbinic area. And they must have a machloket. And that's why it's only Rabbi Yehuda. Okay. This is going to differ from the second version of Rav Nachman that we're going to see in right now. Some people say that Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabbi Avua, machloket mituma l'tara. No, the machloket is on a Torah level. Rabbi Yehuda thinks even on a Torah level, if you're trying to purify yourself in the mikvah, that works if you have 1 foot in the water. The second person can go in, no problem. In which case, if their argument is in Torah law, what are they going to say about rabbinic law? Right, we're going to be more lenient, in which case there won't even be a debate. Everyone's going to agree it's fine. If it's something rabbinic that the rabbis had said, you're tamei, even though you're really not by Torah law, even the rabbis will permit the second person when your foot is still in the water, when the first person's foot is still in the water. In which case, pliga de Rabbi Pidat. In this case, it's going to disagree with Rabbi Pidat. Why is that? Because Rabbi Pidat said that in the case of rabbinic, Raglocha b'mayim is only Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. And according to Rav Nachman, everyone agrees that it would work in a case of rabbinic law. So basically, there's this debate about what the debate between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis is. And Rabbi Pidat takes one side, and Rav Nachman takes either the same side or maybe a different side. We don't know, depending on which version of Rav Nachman you have. Okay, and it's all about which case do they disagree about and what would they agree about? Would they agree, well, we're going to be more strict according to Torah law, or we're going to be more lenient, they agree about in rabbinic law. Okay, Amar Ula. Ula now says, what we really now want to do is to say, how far does Rabbi Yehuda take this law of good achit? Okay, good achit means, again, we view the water as if it's dripping down off my body and as if it's still in the mikveh, as long as my foot is in the mikveh. Would he also say, if you remember my mechitza, we talked about good achit mechitza, which means you can have the mechitza going down. We also learned good asik mechitza, which is you can imagine the wall going up. Would he say the same thing here? And we get to some crazy case, which is Li Rabbi Yehuda, So they asked Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yehuda, ma'ulad bil machatim b'tzinooriot b'rosho shel rishon. Let's say I had a needle, okay, in my hair, okay, like you can imagine, like people put pens in their ear, I was knitting and I had, either a regular needle or a knitting needle, okay, that's the tzinoriot or knitting needles. I had different type of needles in my hair. They needed to be purified. And my foot's in the mikvah, but the needles didn't go underwater. Now, if we say good asik, we imagine the water going up. Maybe they can become pure. I mean, it seems a little crazy, right? But if you really believe good asik, that water could, just like it could go down, it's as if it's in the mikvah. Here, it's as if it got on top of your head. Maybe those things that I stuck on top of my head would be pure. So do we say good achit it leila Rabbi Yehuda, but good asik leila? He only views water as going down, not going up. Maybe this has to do with laws of gravity, right? That the water will go down eventually if I waited long enough, but water doesn't go up in a natural manner. Oh, Dilma, good asik nami itle, or maybe he also holds good asik, that the water can go up and then those things on top of my head would become pure, even though they're actually not even in the mikvah, which is a little bit crazy. Amar le Tani Chua says, let's learn it from here. Shalosh gamamiyot benacha. Here's a source, a Tannaitic source. It comes from the Tosefta and Mikvaot. And it says, I have three little, what do you call them? Here, three depressions. That's how they say it in the Quran. Three depressions in a stream. Okay. There's one above the other. Okay. There's three depressions. And okay, 1, 2, 3. One is higher, one is lower, one is in the middle, one is lower. So now we have these depressions in the stream. They're full of water. It almost makes their own mikvah, okay? But they each have to have 40 se'ah, or maybe not. That's the whole thing. Can we view them as being connected to each other? So it says here in the Tosefta, so this is the situation that they're describing. The top one has 20, the bottom one has 20. That's not enough for a mikvah. But the middle one that connects everything has 40 se'ah, which is the minimum measurement for a mikvah. We're back to this stream of rain is coming down and connecting the three depressions in the stream. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, that's who we're looking for. Rabbi Yehuda, what would he say? Now, if you say good asik, what do you say? The water can go up, and the one where it has 20 se'ah, since it's connected by rainwater, we view it as if they're connected to each other. So Rabbi Yehuda says, Meir haya omer, he quotes Rabbi Meir, matbil be'elyona, you can dunk in the top one. Since he quotes Rabbi Meir and he doesn't disagree, it seems like he agrees with Rabbi Meir, which means good asik works. In which case, if it works there, it will work by us as well. But then the Gemara says, how do you know that he agrees with Rabbi Meir? You missed this other braita. The Hatanya doesn't say in a braita, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, getting Talmud Bet. You might think it's late in the daf, we're getting Talmud Bet, but if you look now in Talmud Bet, it's one of those great dafim for Daf Yomi, very, very short. He said in a braita, Meir haya Omer matbil be'elyona. He said in a different braita that Rabbi Meir says, notice he calls him Meir, right? But Rabbi Meir says you can dunk in the upper one. Va'ani Omer b'tachtona v'lo be'elyona. And I say only the bottom one, not the top one, because the water is streaming from the middle one down to the bottom one. Again, gravity, right? We're going to hold, again, I assume what's motivating him, I don't know, is the fact that gravity, right? It's going down, yes, but not up. So here Rabbi Yehuda explicitly says no, which would mean then he doesn't hold good asik, and sorry, but you can't tovel your knitting needles if they're in your hair and your foot is in the mikvah. So now this was a discussion between, right, what happened? They asked Rabbi Yochanan, what's with Rabbi Yehuda? And he gave them the following source. And then they learned it from there. And then they said to him, but wait, isn't there a braita? To which he says, Amar le, itanya tanya. Well, if there's a braita, then there's a braita, and I guess I'm wrong. Okay. So again, this is someone admitting that he made a mistake, which is great, right? But people are willing to say, oh, I didn't realize there was a braita. If there's really a braita, then I guess I'm wrong. Okay. Next part of the Mishna. The Mishna then had said, "Hatovel lechulin v'uchzak lechulin." Right? If you toveled for chulin, which we then said means even you just toveled even without intent, it works for chulin, but not for maser sheni. And we saw these levels. There was chulin, maser sheni. Then there was truma, kodesh, chatat. So mani matnitin. Who does the Mishna go like that have these 5 levels? Rabbanan, we're going to now see not everybody agree with all those levels. Deshane lehu ben chulin lemaser. There's a machloket about whether chulin and maser are on the same level or a different level. So Rabbanan are the ones who distinguish between chulin and maser. They hold that maser has sanctity to it. And this Mishnah then would follow that opinion. But there's a problem because Ema Seifa, in the latter part of the Mishnah, it says, Bigdei ha'aretz midras leprushim, bigdei prushim midras le'ochlei truma. And I pointed this out when we learned the Mishnah. The Maser Sheni is missing in that part. When we talk about Trumat Midras, it says, right, if you're an Ama Aretz, then someone, you give your clothes to a Prushi, right? And the Prushi has to worry that your clothes weren't carefully watched if the Prushi wants to eat chulin. The next level is Bigdei Prushim Midras Le'ochlei Truma. Someone who eats Truma can't trust the Prushi that he's going to keep it well enough for what the Truma person needs. And notice that Maser Sheni is missing there. So in that case, that must be like Rabbi Meir, who holds that chulin and maser sheni are at the same level, because there you're missing that level. So now it's very confusing. You're going to say Reisha Rabbanan v'Sefer Rabbi Meir. The beginning part of the Mishnah holds like the rabbis, and the second part holds like Rabbi Meir. We've asked this question many times, where we seem to have a Mishnah that part of it holds by one opinion and part of it holds by another. And often they answer in this way, which is, I guess you're right. It's not ideal to say that, but yes, Reisha Rabbanan v'Sefer Rabbi Meir. You'd have to say that. The first part of the Mishnah is the rabbi's approach, and the second, it switches in the middle without telling you, right? Mishnah would switch all the time, different opinions, but they usually tell you that's divrei so-and-so, and someone else says blah, blah, blah. This case, it didn't say it, but it must be, because otherwise it makes no sense. That's the first answer. The second answer is Rav Acha bar Ada matnei la b'seifa chamesh ma'alot. Rav Acha bar Ava had a different version of our Mishnah, that in the Midras part, it added in the level of Maser Sheni, okay? And that resolves it then, umoke lakula kerabanan. And then you say the entire Mishnah goes like the rabbis, and just there's a different version of this Mishnah, which didn't appear by us, but obviously someone else had a different version, which included all 5 levels, which then would match the rabbis, and then we don't have a problem at all. So it's a kind of creative way of getting rid of the problem by saying, oh, we have a different version, okay, which we know already that there were always lots of versions floating around. Okay, we'll now learn this next sentence, even though it doesn't really connect to what we're going to learn today. It's going to really be connected to tomorrow's daf. We'll learn it much more tomorrow, but the last line of today's daf is Amar Rav Meri. Shmami, now we can infer from here, and the whole question is to be, where do we infer this from? Chulin shenasu al taharat hakodesh kekodesh tamu. If you treat your chulin like it's kodesh, like it's right 2 levels up or 3 levels up, actually, not like chulin, not like maser sheni, not like truma, but like kodshim, then kekodesh tamu. It basically has the status of sacrificial meat, even though it's not. Okay, you can get it. Basically, is treated as if you treat it that way, then it has that status. We'll see what this means, and we'll see where we get this from, where the shmami now, where we infer this from in tomorrow's daf. So have a great day, everybody. We will pick up from here tomorrow.